The Dutch Golden Age gave the world many wonderful things: Rembrandt, global trade networks, and the unforgettable moment in economic history when people looked at a flower and said, "Yes, I will absolutely trade my entire house for that." This moment, of course, is Tulip Mania, culminating in the infamous tulip crash of February 1637, a financial implosion so dramatic that economists still use it today as a cautionary tale.
It was crazy, a true mania, a true speculative bubble, because it made no sense that anybody would bet on an ever-increasing price of a flower.
Tulips first arrived in Europe through diplomatic and scholarly exchanges with the Ottoman Empire in the mid-1500s. They were exotic, chic, and just obscure enough for wealthy Europeans to pretend they knew something others didn't. Certain tulips infected by the tulip-breaking virus developed spectacular multicolored streaks, making them highly desirable.
The viruses are specialists in reprogramming plant cells, causing havoc in a plant's normal development by reinforcing some genes and deactivating others. When the pigment production in some cells is superactivated, the result can be dark red stripes. When the pigment production is stifled, a bright white stripe will appear, or dots, creating special patterns.
Their vivid shapes and colors weren't just beautiful, they were status symbols. These rare bulbs were the Pokemon cards of the 1600s, and everyone wanted the rarest versions.
Try to predict what the future price will bring. You may be wrong.
Ordinary single-color tulips never went for much, maybe even less than a florin. Broken tulips were a bit more interesting. They would have streaks caused by the virus mentioned previously, and could fetch somewhere between 40 to 200 florins, which could be a month's wages at the time, depending on your job. But at the peak of Tulip Mania, these were still small fry stuff. Once you got your hands on a Van Gouda tulip, you were talking serious amounts of cash. These tulips had a yellow and red broken pattern. Regular varieties could go for around 500 florins, while general types could fetch almost 1,000. To put this in perspective, a skilled laborer at the time was earning around 300 to 400 florins a year. Other elite tulips included the Admiraal van Enkhuizen, a flower with purple streaks fetching around 1,200 florins or a full-blown house at the time, and the Viceroy, an ever so slightly different purple pattern to the Admiral, but would go for around 4 times as much at a staggering 4,000 florins. At this point, we are talking silly money. You could buy one Viceroy tulip bulb or multiple homes in a canal boat. But if you really wanted to whip it out and put it on the table for all to see, you would get yourself a Semper Augustus tulip, a tulip someone once offered 12 acres of land, or 5,500 florins for.
And the more unique the bulb is, the more you tend to value it. Now, why would a particularly unique and new variety of bulb have a high value, a very high value, so high that it might equal the price of a substantial house, as it did in the Netherlands? Well, that's because that bulb reproduces.
The tulips were unlike anything the Europeans of the time had seen before, and besotted with their beauty, they began buying them for increasingly maddening amounts of money.
When we look today at tulips, we might think that they were beautiful, but they are not the tulips that the Dutchmen of the 17th century saw. They were even more vivid and colourful, and the value of a tulip was extremely closely tied up to the colours on it. And the finer those colours were, the more highly esteemed the bulb was.
Many of these strains of tulip have been lost in time, meaning these artist renditions are the closest thing we have to go on when determining what they looked like. However, it is now known that many of these illustrations may have been exaggerated or entirely fabricated to entice potential buyers at the time.
These tulip books are our best source of information about historic flowers, or at least of an artist's flowering imagination.
These pictures are very beautiful. They show tulips of the most exotic fineness, but you're still trusting that the person who's showing you this picture does actually own the bulb, and there's still lots of scope there for all sorts of chicanery and mistrust.
But Tulip Mania wasn't driven only by the beauty or rarity of certain tulips. It arose from a perfect storm of social, economic, and psychological factors in the Dutch Golden Age. The Netherlands at the time was one of the richest places in the world, with a booming merchant class eager for luxury goods and speculative opportunities. A thriving financial system allowed ordinary citizens, not just elites, to participate in futures markets, where tulip bulbs could be bought and sold months before they bloomed.
So any trading of bulbs in the autumn or in the winter, by its very nature, was a forward market. They would be delivered when they came out of the ground in June.
This created an early form of derivatives trading, enabling people to profit without ever touching a flower. Combine this with a culture that prized status symbols, a shortage of bulbs due to slow propagation, and widespread belief that prices could only go up, and a speculative bubble became almost inevitable. In essence, Tulip Mania happened because people treated tulips not as plants, but as assets, driven more by collective optimism, market innovation, and fear of missing out than by the flowers themselves.
But everyone else in the herd just follows on the basis of that person's doing the investment, and they just throw their money.
People were going mad for the tulips, but with all things, not everyone is up to date with the latest trends. Imagine you had a really rare labubu, and your granddad gave it to your dog thinking it was a chew toy. It's not his fault. It looks like a dog's chew toy, and he doesn't know what the hell the labubu is. Well, the same thing was happening with tulips in 1634. Not everyone caught on as quickly as others. A farmer digging in his field found a strange-looking bulb. Thinking it was a weed, he chopped it up. It turned out to be a rare flame tulip worth hundreds. Another famous tale is of a visiting sailor who mistook a rare tulip bulb, worth as much as a house, for an onion. He sliced it up and ate it with his herring breakfast. When the owner found out, he allegedly chased the sailor through the port screaming about eating a fortune. The sailor, confused, said something like, "It tasted like an onion," which only made it worse. The price of tulips was getting out of hand. Tulip trading often happened in taverns called colleges, where merchants drank beer while bidding on flowers that weren't even in bloom, like something out of The Wolf of Wall Street. During the peak, a single Viceroy bulb was reportedly traded for 2 tons of butter, 1,000 pounds of cheese, 12 sheep, 4 oxen, 8 pigs, 2 barrels of wine, a complete suit of clothes, a silver cup, and a bed. Exactly how someone traded their worldly possessions for a flower they wouldn't see for 3 months is bizarre, but strangely might not be the most ridiculous part of this story yet. By the 1630s, tulips weren't just pretty, they became investment vehicles. Buyers invented forward contracts, allowing them to buy bulbs still in the ground months before they bloomed. Some groups were so speculative that they traded bulbs they neither owned nor intended to own. A satirical pamphlet from the time jokes that some traders had bought and sold a tulip 10 times over, even though the bulb itself still slept in the earth. If it hasn't been made clear by now, the events of Tulip Mania were truly insane, which is wild when you consider the events of the whole fiasco only lasted about a year. Finally, in February 1637, the bubble popped. In February 1637, at a routine bulb auction in Haarlem, buyers simply didn't show up. Whether it was possibly an outbreak of the plague reducing attendance, or simple exhaustion of new buyers, the important thing was, no one bid. This was the 17th century equivalent of posting a product online and getting 0 likes, 0 comments, and people began to panic. If tulips couldn't sell in Haarlem, the heart of the trade, their value elsewhere was very questionable. Could it be that people didn't care about the stripy flowers anymore? Within days, word spread through the Dutch Republic that buyers were refusing to honor contracts. Tulip prices collapsed by 80 to 90%, leaving traders with bulbs worth a fraction of the sums they owed. Merchants who had expected to flip bulbs for profit discovered they were holding rapidly depreciating flowers. Because the market revolved around forward contracts, this triggered a cascade of defaults. As Anne Goldgar notes, the crash had less to do with physical tulips and more to do with the speculative financial instruments wrapped around them. Without buyers, prices collapsed overnight. Tulips went from being worth fortunes to being about as valuable as a bag of carrots, which, incidentally, would at least feed you during the soon-to-come economic crisis. Luckily, though, the Dutch economy did not collapse. Trade, finance, and banking remained strong. Instead, the fallout hit a specific segment of merchants, craftsmen, and speculators who had taken risky positions in tulip futures. Many faced lawsuits as sellers tried to force buyers to honor contracts. However, the Dutch government stepped in and issued guidance that most contracts should be canceled with buyers paying only a small fee, usually 3.5% of the contract value. Courts refused to enforce debts for tulip speculation, arguing that such contracts were more like gambling than legitimate commerce. Socially, the aftermath included embarrassment, damaged reputations, and satire. Tulip traders were mocked in pamphlets and plays, and many avoided speaking of the episode at all. But the broader economy was largely unaffected, and the Dutch Golden Age continued. Modern historians argue that Tulip Mania, while bizarre, wasn't as apocalyptic as the old stories claim. Not everyone lost their homes, and the economy did not collapse. But that doesn't mean there weren't massive lessons to be learned. This bubble popping was more like a really embarrassing group project where everyone pretended they knew what was going on until the deadline hit. Tulip Mania remains a powerful metaphor for speculative bubbles, from the dot-com crash to NFTs of cartoon apes. We still fall into many of the same traps people did back in the 17th century. After hundreds of years, 3 things remain true. Humans love trends. Humans love money. Humans are terrible at combining the two.